What is the greatest Draft League Pokemon of all time? We all have a personal favorite mon, and that can be for a ton of different reasons that ranges from fun factor, versatility, or even personal success. For example, mine is Victini. I love using it and have had a ton of success with it, and its versatility is a huge selling point for me. However, I'm not delusional enough to say that it's the best mon in any particular format. Heck, it's probably not top 10 in any format. Value in draft can be pretty darn subjective, but in most cases the top mons are generally agreed upon. Today we'll be embarking on the difficult task of trying to find the best Draft League Pokemon of all time. If you guys do enjoy today's Draft League video and discussion, please consider dropping a like on the video, but also subscribing to the channel. We're on our way to 3,000 subs, and if everybody who watches this video today drops a sub, we'll get there, and that would be awesome. Obviously, we're creeping up on the end of the year. It's pretty easy, and if you don't enjoy the videos later on, you can always unsub later on. So I'd appreciate if you help me out. I'm sure you'll enjoy the content. And yeah, with that being said, let's jump into it. First up, let's lay the foundation. How will we go about deciding this debate? I figured the best way to go about this was finding the general consensus best Pokemon in each different generation of Draft League. Generation 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then stacking them up against each other. From there, we won't necessarily be saying X Pokemon is better than the other 3 in practice, therefore it wins. Instead, we'll be taking a look at that Pokemon's effect on the metagame around it. I'll be looking at its level of dominance and how much the metagame tends to warp around it. The Pokemon with the greatest effect and influence over its metagame will be crowned the greatest Draft League Pokemon of all time. Keep in mind, I will also not be considering Pokemon that are typically banned in the vast majority of leagues. This means Pokemon like Ultra Sun and Moon Magearna or Scarlet and Violet Fluttermane will not be considered in this video. With the ground rules out of the way, let's check out the best Pokemon in Generation 6. The best Pokemon in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire Draft League is going to be Mega Gardevoir. I won't lie to you guys, I had trouble deciding this one. That's due to no fault of Gardevoir. It mostly comes down to my own playing background. I started playing Draft in Generation 7, and I've only played in a handful of Generation 6 leagues and tournaments. However, despite this, I had a feeling it was going to be Mega Gardevoir. This was also confirmed to me by multiple other better ORAS players that I know. What makes Gardevoir so dominant though? A plethora of qualities, but the most of which is going to be that stab, pixelate hyper voice that it can throw off. Pixelate is Mega Gardevoir's ability, turning all normal type moves into a fairy type move and giving them an additional 1.3 times multiplier. This was later nerfed to 1.2 times in Generation 7, but Mega Gardevoir and ORAS did not have to worry about this at all. Therefore, these hyper voices hit like a freaking truck, coming off of stab, the 1.3 times multiplier, and 165 base special attack. Not only that, ORAS isn't known for its great fairy resist. And then when you take into account the fact that Gardevoir got plenty of coverage for most fairy resists, you were in for a world of hurt. Obviously, the poisons that tried to resist Hyper Voice were just going to get blown up by a Psychic or Psy Shock. Then Steel types had to worry about Focus Blast blowing them sideways. Even the Steels that could naturally take a Focus Blast like Ferrothorn and Bronzong had to worry about Hidden Power Fire and Shadow Ball respectively. This made Guard Knight impossible to deal with in a defensive manner. On top of this incredible offensive potential, Guard could also function very solid defensively. Very often, Hyper Voice alone was enough in terms of offensive coverage, so you would see Gardevoir spec into more defensive Wish variants, taking on Will-O-Wisp, Calm Mind, Thunder Wave, and other great options. Will-O-Wisp in particular was spammed on Gardevoir into the very often physically offensive Steel types that would try and come in and check it. Generation 6 draft is often seen as a very balanced and solved metagame, with not many broken things slipping through the cracks. However, Mega Gardevoir is probably the only Pokemon that is considered ban-worthy by enough people to be discussed time and time again in tournaments, even today. When you're drafting an ORAS, you need to think of Mega Gardevoir counterplay, whether that be having ways of pivoting around it or having great offensive pressure into it. That alone gives it the title of Best Generation 6 Draft League Pokemon. On to Generation 7, and this one was easy. By far, the best Pokemon in Usum is Tapu Koko. No, we are not counting Megazam. Do not allow Megazam. The second fairy type on our list, what makes Koko so dominant? Well, there was a multitude of factors once again that made Koko so incredible, all of which made Koko seem like it was specifically made to thrive in the Usum draft metagame. We'll go over them one by one. First of which is going to be its speed. Koko's elite speed tier of 130 cannot be met by most Pokemon. In the Draft League metagame, speed is one of the main determining factors deciding if you will accomplish what you need to, and especially the roles Koko was often assigned to. 130 speed allowed it to be that incredible revenge killer, breaker, sweeper, and pivot/momentum grabber. However, speed alone won't let you accomplish this in a proficient manner. Koko was blessed with an incredible move pool as well, thankfully. With access to both Volt Switch and U-Turn, it made for one of the best momentum grabbers in the game. Koko forced very specific switches, and pairing Koko with a strong offensive piece often led to endless cycles of KOs. However, it could only force these switches because it was so strong offensively on its own. Between Thunderbolt, Dazzling Gleam, Hidden Power Ice and Fire, and maybe a Grass Knot, Koko was nigh unguardable. You wouldn't think as much though with Koko's measly base 95 special attack, but in Generation 7, Electric Terrain boosted electric type attacks by 1.5 times and not the 1.3 times it boosts today. So between strong electric stab, very strong neutral coverage and everything that electric didn't hit, Grass Knot for ground types, and Hidden Power for anything you didn't already hit, Koko was very difficult to deal with throughout the course of the game. It also had a very strong base 115 attack, and while it did not have great physical coverage, Wild Charge, Brave Bird, and more importantly U-Turn hit very hard. This on top of the ability to Z-move and absolutely nuke through potential checks makes Koko a monster to deal with. It also had a great support move pool as well. It could Calm Mind and function as a setup sweeper, Roost to keep itself healthy, Defog to remove hazards, or even function as an incredible dual screen setter for hyper offense teams. There really isn't much you can't do with Koko. It's another Pokemon much like Gardevoir in the sense that you have to account for the Koko matchup when drafting your team. Giving it the best Mon and Usum was a no-brainer. Speaking of no-brainers, for Sword and Shield we have Dragapult. Another absolute speed demon that feels like it was built for Draft League success. Speed is once again going to be a main contributing factor to Pult's consistent dominance throughout the Swish metagame. 142 speed is incredible, with the only other real threats in the format that are actually faster being really just Zero Aura. In fact, one of the reasons Zero Aura is valued so highly in Sword and Shield is because it's one of the few genuinely solid Pokemon that can outpace Pult. Much like Koko, if you look at Dragapult's attacking stats, you'll see a solid base attack with bad coverage and a mediocre 100 base special attack. So why is Pult so effective then? First is going to be the deepness of its move pool. Access to coverage like Flamethrower and Fire Blast, Surf and Hydro Pump, Thunderbolt and Thunder, and U-Turn for momentum grabbing. And then on top of that, having Thunder Wave and more importantly Will-O-Wisp to cripple its switch into status. Then you have to take into account the dual stab combination. In Generation 8, the move Pursuit was removed from the game, allowing ghost types to spam Shadow Ball and Hex with little to no repercussion. This means a Dragapult who's often modest threw off spec Shadow Balls for free. Dark types got rocked by Draco Meteor or took annoying U-turns plus hazard damage, while normal types suffered a similar fate. Or Pult could just rock a heavy duty boot set and burn them all with Will-O-Wisp on the switch in. 100 special attack felt much stronger when the attacker often went first and nothing resisted it. On top of this, Pult is by far the best facilitator in Draft League history. So often you see whatever round 2 Pokemon that was paired with Dragapult skyrocket to the tops of the kill leaderboard. This could be a strong offensive poison like Nidoking, a tanky strong steel like Melmetal, or a fast strong fighting type like Galarian Zapdos. And more than often, this is a combination of these three, obviously made up by a ton of different potential Pokemon. By the end of Sword and Shield, there was not many leagues you would not see Pult go as the first overall pick, and he was typically banned in the tournament scene. This makes Dragapult the best Draft League Pokemon in Sword and Shield by a long shot. Last up was the most recent generation in Scarlet and Violet. This one was even harder than Auras for me. We're only a year into the metagame and it is ever changing. However, I decided on a pretty controversial pick. Not controversial in the sense that it's debatably worse than anything, but more so that I think as time goes on, we'll begin to see it banned more and more. And it's going to be everyone's favorite cat, Chien-Pao, or cooler Weavile. This Pokemon, like our last 2 entries, is insanely fast, putting it at base 135 speed. But where Chien-Pao separates from the others is in the power department. Pult and Koko were obviously very strong on their own, but they played a momentum-grabbing facilitator role at an elite level. Chien-Pao did not use his speed to get the damage in, he is the damage. The combination of his base 130 attack stat and the Sword of Ruin ability make Chien-Pao one of the most insane wall breakers ever allowed in Draft League history. Sword of Ruin is an ability that multiplies Pokemon on the field's defense by 0.75 times, making that 130 base attack feel like 400 base attack. This, on top of how solid the dual stab combination of Dark and Ice is, solid fighting coverage in Sacred Sword, Sword Stance to boost said insane attack stat, and priority from both stabs in Ice Shard and Sucker Punch make this Pokemon nigh unguardable. I wish there was more to dive into with Chien-Pao, but nuance is lost on this Pokemon. There's no need for intricate interactions and matchups when Pao has very little defensive answers, if any, and then throw any counterplay out the window if you for some reason allow this monster to Terra. Now we know what the top dog in each format is, but which of these is the best? Which was the most meta-defining and centralizing Pokemon in their generation? I think we can pretty easily eliminate both Mega Gardevoir and Tapu Koko. They were obviously incredible, but not near as meta-warping and ban considerable as the other two. This leaves us with Swiss Dragapult and SV Chien-Pao. Before I give my personal answer, reminder this is not official or fact, just my opinion based on my draft experience and what I've seen in my 1,000+ games in the format. And for me personally, I have to go with Dragapult. I went this way for a multitude of reasons, but the main reason being is how consistently long Pult has been the cover boy for Sword and Shield draft. Throughout pre-home, post-home, Isle of Armor, and Crown Tundra Sword and Shield, all 4 metagames, it has always reigned supreme. And while Chien-Pao is much more threatening as a Pokemon on its own, there are comparable Pokemon. It's the biggest hitter in a generation of big hitters. Power creep has been absolutely insane this generation, especially with Terra. Because of this, I think there are multiple Pokemon that can be considered when drafting in Scarlet and Violet with the #1 overall pick. In Sword and Shield, it was Dragapult. Now, obviously, you don't have to pick Pult if you don't feel like it or playing for fun, but if you want the highest possible ceiling for your team, Dragapult should always be your pick, unless the league is allowing something egregiously broken. For that reason, with my very official title of some dude who uploads and plays way too much Draft League, Sword and Shield Dragapult is the greatest Draft League Pokemon of all time. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I thought this was a really, really cool idea. I had a lot of fun in making this, and I had a lot of debates on Twitter, throughout Discord with a bunch of people. And there were some mons that were mentioned for generations that I didn't really consider myself. I heard some people say Spectre for Sword and Shield, which I would personally disagree with, but I do agree that it definitely made kind of guaranteeing yourself something for in the matchup was very, very important. So I understand the argument there. I heard some pretty crazy ones for Gen 6 and 7, but I heard a lot of really, really compelling arguments for Gen 8. So it was a lot of fun to do. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any ideas for different discussions you want me to kind of tackle and see if I could do. I love kind of just really digging deep and finding really fun things to talk about with Draft League. But again, remember, this is not the official list. I'm probably going to clickbait it like it is, but draft is subjective. And that's the most fun thing. Like I said, my favorite Pokemon of all time is Victini to use, and obviously he's not the best ever, but I love using him. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, drop a like if you enjoyed, sub if you're new. I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Later.